I was really happy with the way that the fight with the cave troll came out on Fellowship of the Ring. That's when they're in this tomb under Moria and there's this big troll and stabs Frodo, I think, and the guys all bloody try to kill him. And that was actually interesting because that was like handheld. That was us doing a CGI creature but doing it with handheld cameras, which I don't think that had really been done before. So making it look pretty grubby and like a doco style handheld realism, and I was really happy with the way that actually ended up. I mean, it's not technically the troll doesn't look as good as stuff we can do now, you know, but just I mean, it certainly sticks in my mind as something I was pretty proud of at the time, yeah.
Being a storyboard artist, especially for Peter, you know, I'd learned a lot about visual storytelling, and in Lord of the Rings we translated from storyboards into 3D previs. So we started, you know, actually turning what I'd drawn into actual shots and animating camera moves, which then defined how the shooting process went. We also found that you sometimes got to location and you had a better idea because of now you're actually looking at the set as it was built, and you might have a better camera angle. And so it's also, you know, a case of, you know, have a plan but don't be afraid to throw it away if you can think of something better on the day. And so it's sort of more those sort of almost, you know, those high level kind of philosophical ways of working than the actual technical, you know, the technical specifics. I mean, there are a lot of technical things you need to keep on top of, but usually you defer those to your visual effects supervisor and your director of photography, and, you know, and you're just there to be sort of keeping an eye on, you know, making sure the performances are real and making, you know, getting the actors kind of to trust you and making sure that, you know, they're doing their best work and that you're telling the story in the most interesting way that you can.
I would say that probably, you know, with Lord of the Rings, the big advance in CGI with that movie was probably Gollum. You know, and it's not just the computer part of Gollum, it's the whole thing. It's a motion captured character who's a real character, whose lips have to move and his face moves and his eyes have to look real, and he has to interact with the ground, and, you know, everywhere he goes he has to have footprints left behind and everything else. So I know there was a lot of stuff with Gollum that had never been done before, and we, you know, we didn't know just how far we could actually go with it. You know, we were sort of, you know, nervous, I'd say, you know, because if you actually haven't got the software and you've got this job to do, you know, you're never quite sure that you can actually create something that's going to look any good. And there was certainly a period with Gollum, we didn't have Gollum really for the first movie. In the first Lord of the Rings film, Fellowship of the Ring, which got Gollum's in about 2 shots, and that Gollum is completely different to the Gollum that's in the next film, the Two Towers. The Fellowship of the Ring Gollum is pretty gnarly, pretty crude. It was as good as we could do at that time, and we had to have something in the movie, but we put him in very deep shadow, and that was on purpose because he didn't look very good. But nonetheless, we ran out of time, and that was what we had to have in the movie, but we still had another year to get him really good for the Two Towers, where he was in, you know, half the film. So that the Two Towers Gollum, which is a complete overhaul of, you know, that finally got to the place that we wanted him to go.
What was interesting about the evolution of Gollum was designed before Andy Serkis was even cast, and the design was fine. It was a sort of, you know, it looked kind of what you'd expect Gollum to look like. It had big eyes and this green emaciated sort of figure. But then when we cast Andy and we saw how wonderful his performance was, it just wasn't translating into the animated character. You know, we weren't able to get, you know, the characteristics of his face. And then Andy was cast as Smeagol in the flashback. And it was then that I actually just looked at it and thought, okay, this isn't working. And what I did is I took a photo of Andy as Smeagol, and I then got the proportions of what our current Gollum puppet was at Weta, and I did a pencil sketch, and I've got it somewhere, but I did a pencil sketch, which is then going, okay, if Andy had become this emaciated figure and his eyes had got slightly bigger, what would that look like? And that sort of became Gollum. And it went through another design phase in 3D with a sculpture. So we sort of drove the performance to be based on Andy. And then when we got to, when Weta Digital went through the hoops and they remodeled the face, and there was a shot, it's when Frodo and Sam catch the rabbits and they're talking about cooking the meat, and Gollum spits, you know, goes, oh, and there was one shot and we saw it and it was like, we've nailed it.
I mean, Gollum is always, you know, he's described in the books and everything, you know, this little weedy, skinny sort of, I mean, you know, he's fairly vividly described in a lot of the illustrations over the years. You know, you know, people illustrate a very similar sort of creature. It's not, you know, no one really goes too wide. So we sort of knew what Gollum had to look like in general terms. You know, again, we just thought that Gollum would probably just be a voice artist that we want. You know, we hadn't put our brains into this whole mocap thing at all at that stage. So Andy came in, and I didn't know who he was. He wasn't a familiar face to me. And anyway, and so he, in an audition, like an actor sits in a chair, like, you know, I'm here, and you've got a camera, and you read the lines, and you sort of, you know. But Andy just jumped on the furniture. He leapt on the chairs. He went on the floor. He was coughing up. He said he based his audition on his cat coughing up fur balls. And he was leaping. I mean, he was leaping over the backs of the chairs and the tables, and stuff went flying. And he was doing all the physicality. I mean, I thought, you know, I was kind of a bit taken back, right? This guy is pretty over the top, you know. But then I could actually, even at that moment, I mean, what Andy was doing in his own clever way is he was saying, without saying it, he was actually saying, guys, you know, I can give you a performance, not just the voice, I can actually be Gollum, and don't you want me to be, to actually act, not that he was going to be, you know, because he knew it was going to be CGI, but he was pitching, without, you know, in a subtle way, he was pitching the whole idea of, you know, you can use my performance to drive your CGI character. And it was him doing all that was the first time that idea even, it was one that we thought about. And so we slowly, Andy and Weta and us, we slowly went through this period of discovery, realizing that actually if Andy acts Gollum and we motion capture him, it's pretty good. And then if we can figure out a way to capture his face, that's pretty good too. So when Andy moves his face around, you know, and says things, Gollum does the same thing. And then what happens is you actually get you get a much better result if the face of the creature is close in structure to the actor's face. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but somehow it looks better. So we sort of redesigned Gollum to look a little bit like Andy Serkis, a sort of a Gollumized version of Andy Serkis. And it was done not to flatter Andy, I mean, although, you know, certainly deserves it, but it was done because you get better results if the facial structure of your creature is sort of based on the actor's general facial structure, and they actually did it the same because Weta did the Apes films. I know, you know, they went through the same thing on those movies. They made Caesar, the character that Andy plays, they made him look sort of Andy Serkis-like as well, because it gets you a better result. We couldn't, for the Lord of the Rings movies, motion capture on the set with the actors. It was something to do with the lighting and the motion capture cameras which you have around the thing. So in other words, what that means is that you'd have a scene with Gollum and Frodo and Sam. So you've got Elijah and Sean and Andy. And we would shoot the three of them on a location or in a set in the studio, and Elijah and Sean were obviously, you know, acting the scene, and we shoot a bunch of takes, and their performance would be in the film. Andy was also performing, and yet none of what he did we could use, not one thing, because we couldn't motion capture him. But he was there, you know, performing it, because obviously the character of Gollum had to be very real for them. But poor old Andy, what happened is that the film would be, you know, the shoot would be over, Elijah and Sean would go home to the States, and then Andy would have to redo everything all over again by himself in a motion capture stage, you know, in a properly set up stage where the motion capture cameras would record. So he had to repeat everything he'd done before, you know, looking at the screen with playback, and this time around his movements were getting recorded. And this might be, I mean, in some cases like 9 months after he'd done it the first time around, but everything had to be done twice, which is a bit soul destroying, you know, in some ways. I mean, it was actually good on one level, because all of our focus was just on him, so we were able to really kind of finesse it. And then by the time we did Gollum on The Hobbit, by that stage, the technology existed that we could motion capture on the set. So when Gollum and, you know, Martin Freeman doing this scene together, like, you know, Martin's being shot and Andy's being motion captured all at the same time, so he didn't have to do anything afterwards. It was all captured live on set. If you watch the monitor, you see Martin Freeman and you see Gollum, but you see like a sort of a slightly low-res version of Gollum, but it is Gollum. Andy ain't there at all.